In Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, fighters are often hailed as a straightforward and simple class to play, but that doesn't necessarily need to be the case, for the Battlemaster fighter archetype introduces a whole new dimension to the gameplay and style of the fighter at the table.
The Battlemaster fighter, with their unique combination of strategy, tactics, and positioning, allow any fighter to own the battlefield.
The core of this is the maneuvers available to the Battlemaster fighter, and today we're going to go through all the maneuvers in the player's handbook and find out which one is the ultimate technique. My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the
Dungeon Dudes.
Welcome to our channel where we discuss everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for Dungeon Masters.
We upload new videos every Thursday, so please subscribe so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we are taking an in-depth look at each of the 16 different maneuvers available to Battlemaster fighters. We're going to analyze each of them and figure out which are our top picks.
But as a Battlemaster fighter, you're only going to get to select a few of the options from the 16 Battlemaster maneuvers. So we're going to talk about each one, how they work, which ones are great, and which ones you should leave behind. So let's get rolling. Battlemaster fighters get something called maneuvers that they get to select, and superiority dice, which are a special type of dice that fuel the maneuvers, and they get to use these to have the edge in combat.
When you select the Battlemaster fighter archetype at 3rd level, right away you're going to get to learn 3 maneuvers. You'll then learn 2 more at level 7, level 10, and level 15.
This means that you're probably going to cap out at 9 maneuvers total out of the 16 options.
Most of the maneuvers in the player's handbook enhance your melee or ranged attacks in some way, but you can only ever execute a maneuver once on each attack you make.
Each maneuver will have a description attached to it that tells you exactly when and how that maneuver can be used. There is a slight difference between them. Some of them may include a reaction or a bonus action, whereas others are just straight up part of the attack action you're taking.
In fact, many maneuvers can just be applied when you make an attack that hits. So you actually make an attack roll first and then decide after you've hit whether or not you're going to apply the maneuver to that attack, making superiority dice very, very flexible and easy to use and something that reliably works. However, many maneuvers are just applied whenever you make an attack, which means that the attack doesn't have to happen on your turn when you take the attack action. You can apply a maneuver to an opportunity attack, for example, or if a spell or other class feature lets you make an attack outside your turn, you can actually use one of your maneuvers with that attack too.
When we look at the maneuvers, a lot of them just say that they come into play when you make a weapon attack, which means that you can use them on both melee and ranged attacks.
There are a few maneuvers that can only be used in melee conditions. However, few maneuvers actually specify that you have to use a melee weapon or a ranged weapon specifically, instead allowing you to be flexible with how they come into play.
And of course, all of these maneuvers are fueled by something called superiority dice, which is a number of dice that you have and may roll to add or benefit your maneuvers.
When you start off, your superiority dice will be a D8, and you'll have 4 of them. So when you activate a maneuver, you're spending one of those dice, and usually what will then happen is you'll add the roll of that die to the attack or damage roll, or something else in the maneuver will use the roll of that dice in some way.
You do gain an additional superiority die at 7th and 15th level, and at 10th and 18th level, your superiority die increases in the type of dice that you use, going from a D8 to a D10, and eventually to a D12.
Like all fighter abilities like Action Surge and Second Wind, you regain your superiority dice when you finish a short or a long rest, which means that you will have more throughout the day as you replenish and recuperate between combat encounters during a short rest.
Some of the maneuvers do require your enemy to make a saving throw against the maneuver you're using. The DC for the saving throw is mathed out at 8 plus your proficiency bonus plus either your strength or dexterity modifier. You get to choose.
Yeah, your opponent will always be making a saving throw based on what the maneuver specifies, usually a strength, dexterity, and sometimes a wisdom saving throw. But you always get to put your best ability score forward for determining what they need to roll against.
So let's dive in and talk about all 16 Battlemaster maneuvers and how to use them.
Once we get through them all, we'll pick out our top 5.
So let's get things started with Commander Strike.
Commander Strike is one of the costliest maneuvers of them all. When you take the attack action on your turn, you can opt to use Commander Strike. You spend a superiority die as well as your bonus action, and you forego one of your own attacks in order to command an ally who can see and hear you to spend their reaction to make one weapon attack. They then add the superiority die to their damage roll if the attack hits.
At the end of the day, this one has a very high cost. You're losing your bonus action, an attack, and a superiority die just to get an ally to get an attack. Although there are a lot of times that could be very useful, it might not be worth the cost.
If your ally is a rogue who will be able to make another sneak attack, or someone like a paladin who can do a very, very heavy hit in a desperate situation, it can be worthwhile. But in many cases, it's possible for your allies and yourself to get a lot of extra damage as a fighter out of your own attacks, your own bonus actions, and your own reactions without needing to use one of your superiority dice to do that. So in many cases, the opportunity cost of using Commander Strike is just way too high.
The next maneuver on the list is Disarming Strike, which allows you to add a superiority die to the damage of your attack roll and cause the enemy to need to make a strength saving throw or drop an item that they're holding.
This is a maneuver that you get to choose to apply only when you make an attack that hits. And disarming a foe can have a very big strategic value depending on the fight.
The immediate idea that comes to my head is if an enemy's running at you with a sword and you knock the sword out of their hands, stand over it, and defend it from the enemy. But another great idea is knocking a spellcasting focus out of a spellcaster's hand.
Disarming attack isn't limited to knocking a weapon out of somebody's hands. It can knock any item they might be holding out of their hands, whether that is a spellcasting focus, another magic item that they're holding or carrying, or the evil artifact that they're using to summon a demon lord. Knocking that out of their hands could win the fight for you.
There are so many fights in D&D where the MacGuffin is there in the room and your party versus the enemies are fighting over who has control over it. And that's where Disarming Strike can just knock it out of the enemy's hands anytime that they have it in their possession.
It's important to remember that Disarming Strike can be used on ranged attacks, so you can shoot objects out of people's hands in classic trick shot fashion.
The next maneuver we're going to talk about is Distracting Strike. When you hit an enemy creature with a weapon attack, you can add the superiority dice to your damage roll, causing the enemy to focus on you, meaning that your allies get an opening and the next attack against that creature has advantage.
This applies to both a melee or ranged attack, whether you're making that attack or the next ally is making a melee or ranged attack as well. There's no saving throw here either, making this a reliable way of generating advantage for one of your allies making their next attack. That's about the best that I can say for it. I think there's a lot of other ways that you can use maneuvers to generate advantage on attack rolls, but this is the one that always works.
This is one of the most surefire ways to get advantage to one of your allies. And if you're playing an archer fighter and you shoot an enemy, generating advantage for your rogue to now make sure that they can get that sneak attack, that's an incredible use of this maneuver.
Yeah, or you can just help out the paladin or the barbarian land a key massive damage dealing blow, or the spellcaster to land an important spell.
The next maneuver we're looking at is Evasive Footwork. When you move, you can spend a superiority die and add that to your AC for as long as you are moving.
This is a great way to avoid a bunch of opportunity attacks as you rush from one side of the battlefield to the other. But just be aware that if you use this ability, move a little bit, and then do something, and then want to move again, the Evasive Footwork bonus ends the moment you stop moving. So if you are breaking up your move, you need to make sure that you use this at the right time in your movement to protect yourself from those opportunity attacks. Next, we have Feinting Attack. You can spend a superiority die and use a bonus action on your turn to activate Feinting Attack, immediately gaining advantage on one attack roll made against a creature within 5 feet of you. If the attack hits, you then get to add the superiority die to the damage roll as well.
This maneuver basically means that you give up your bonus action to give yourself advantage and hope that you land it for extra damage.
Overall, this maneuver is a decent way to generate advantage in a desperate situation. It does also cost that bonus action as well, and it only gives you advantage on the next attack that you're making. Because you need to be within 5 feet of the creature that you're feinting against, it does pretty much restrict you to using this with a melee weapon, although conceivably you could use it with a ranged attack. It's just that all that would do would negate the disadvantage that you already suffer from being within 5 feet of them, although maybe you have crossbow expert and that's how you're going to compensate for that. But overall, I think that if you're within 5 feet of somebody and you want to get advantage on your attack roll, one of the later maneuvers is going to be a much better option for you in the long run.
Now we're going to take a look at goading attack. When you land a hit, you can use the superiority die and add it to your damage roll. That causes the enemy to now focus on you, and they must make a wisdom saving throw. Otherwise, they have disadvantage on any attack against a creature other than you.
Now, the cool thing with goading attack is that, again, you can use this on a ranged attack. So you can shoot somebody who is nowhere near you in order to force them to have disadvantage against anyone they might be adjacent to. On the other hand, it is a wisdom saving throw, so they might make their save and not be affected by it at all.
The maneuvers that always hit versus the maneuvers that have a chance to completely miss is always a little bit of a risky play to make. But I do really like that this is kind of the equivalent of in video games when you do a taunt or you're pulling aggro and you're just trying to get the boss or the monster to focus on you and nobody else. This is the maneuver to do that.
While goading attack does feel like the classic taunt, I think that you can achieve better results with a different maneuver. Next up is lunging attack, which is a very simple maneuver. You spend a superiority die to be able to increase your reach for that one melee attack by 5 feet. If the attack hits, you add the superiority die to the damage roll. This is a short and sweet maneuver, useful in a pinch, I think.
It is useful in a pinch, and I can see somebody who really wants to amplify their polearm mastery by adding an additional 5 feet to their attack. That could be kind of cool. But generally speaking, there are a lot of other maneuvers that I think compete with this one as better options.
Yeah, I think that it's fun to get that extra little bit of reach, especially as you said, with a reach weapon, extending it from 10 to 15 feet could really have some interesting uses. But I think that it's a lower priority. I think there's a lot of other ways for Battlemaster maneuvers to extend themselves on the battlefield that aren't as costly as this. And then we come to maneuvering attack, which allows you to spend a superiority die when you hit an enemy with a weapon attack, allowing an ally to take advantage of the situation and spend their reaction to move up to half their speed without provoking opportunity attacks from the target that you hit with the attack.
This is a good way to get an ally out of a tough situation.
Or into one.
Or into a tough situation.
Yes. I really like the tactical flexibility of this maneuver because out of turn movement is really, really rare in the game. And the ability to shuffle around one of your allies and get them into a key position can be a real game changer. The fact that you can hit an enemy and slowly move that slow-moving paladin or barbarian an extra 15 feet towards them could make the difference between that ally being able to get all their attacks out in the turn or not. And the fact that you can also use this maneuver to come up beside the wizard who's getting assaulted by an ogre and let that wizard get out of there without taking another attack is just incredibly useful. I think this is a really valuable maneuver.
Next up, we have menacing attack. When you hit with an attack roll against a creature, you can use a superiority die, adding it to your damage roll, and the target must make a wisdom saving throw or become frightened of you.
So to understand how good this maneuver is, you really have to read the frightened condition and understand the impact that it can have in close quarters fighting and with ranged attacks. A creature that becomes frightened suffers disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks while it can see the source of its fear. And furthermore, it can't willingly move closer to the source of its fear. So menacing attack isn't going to force the target to run away, but if they fail their saving throw and they can see you, they have disadvantage on all their attacks against your allies and you.
This also means that if you use menacing attack as a ranged attack against an enemy who is approaching you and they fail that wisdom saving throw, they now cannot come any closer, meaning that you and your party get to do what you want while they're frightened of you and they can't come any closer and try to hurt you.
The other key element of menacing attack is that because they're frightened of you, they have disadvantage on their ability checks as well, which means that you now could try to grapple or shove them or knock them prone or do other things that require them to make an ability check of some kind, and they're going to have disadvantage on that while they can see you. So if you want to pin a foe down really, really easily, you could use menacing attack against them and then use your extra attack to try to grapple or shove them to the ground, taking advantage of the fact that now they have disadvantage in their contest against you.
Honestly, a fighter using menacing attack against an enemy who's trapped in something like a web spell or really any other spell that requires an ability check to escape from it, giving them disadvantage on that just means that you're helping out the whole party so much, and that's a great combo.
Yeah, it is ultimately dependent on making that first saving throw a failure, and there's a lot of creatures in the game that are straight up immune to the frightened condition as well, but I think that menacing attack basically completely supersedes goading attack to me. I think it's just flat out better, except in those situations where you want to frighten a creature that's immune to fear.
Now we'll look at parry, which is more of a defensive maneuver. When you're hit in combat, you can roll a superiority die and take that number plus your dexterity modifier and remove that from the damage taken.
So parry is one of those ones that I wish it worked like the shield spell. I wish it added to your AC against an attack that hits you, because that would make it so much better and so much more worth using. I think reducing the damage just is not enough, especially at higher levels when you're going to take some really big hits.
I mean, yeah, your superiority die goes up to a D10 and a D12, but then you're still only getting like 15 points knocked off of a 30 damage or a 50 damage attack.
And it's also based on your dexterity modifier. This is one that only works with dexterity. So if you're a strength-based character, this is pretty useless to you. And I think that you want to use it to defend yourself if you're a frontliner, and you can't effectively do that as a frontliner because you're not getting your ability mod to it. I just think that it gets outpaced by the damage so quickly, and it would be so much better if it was a bonus to your AC.
Next up, we're looking at precision attack. When you make an attack roll, you can roll a superiority die and add that number to the attack roll. This is the perfect tool to use if you're going to miss a very vital attack.
Now, of course, you don't get to know whether the attack hit or miss before you choose to apply precision attack. And once you apply precision attack to one of your attacks, you can't then go and apply one of the other maneuvers to it if it hits. So you're basically just buying the damage of the attack with precision attack, but sometimes that can be a lot of damage. The key with precision attack is understanding when to use it and when not to.
I think that it's important, even though it does take a little bit of metagameness here, but once you've gone a couple rounds in combat and a few people have launched attacks at the enemy, and you saw that maybe a 12 didn't hit but a 14 did, and you roll that dice and you hit an 11, you might want to say, you know what, now I know that if I add my superiority die, I can probably hit this target.
Yeah, you want to pay attention to the ebb and flow in battle and see what the numbers were that actually made the hits and use that to assess whether or not it's worth doing. Pretty much, if you've rolled less than 10 to hit, it's probably not worth gambling your superiority die on turning that miss into a hit. But if you rolled a 15 and you think that enemy might have an AC of 17 or 18, it's probably worth it. In particular, precision attack is really, really valuable with feats like Great Weapon Master and Sharpshooter because it helps to compensate for the penalty that the power attack features of those feats grant you. So when you're taking that -5 penalty to get +10 to the damage roll, your attack bonus isn't going to be as high. So precision attack helps you bridge that gap. And now we come to pushing attack, which is another fun maneuver for controlling the positioning of the battlefield, because when you hit an enemy with an attack and use pushing attack against them, they have to make a strength saving throw, or they will be pushed back 15 feet from you.
This is just tactically a very useful maneuver. I find the ability to reposition enemies is key to some combat strategies. If you have a spell that has an area of an effect going on, or you're on a bridge or near a ledge, or fighting in any inconspicuous area where there's somewhere where somebody could fall into something horrible, this actually becomes a very useful tactic.
It's worth reminding you once again that pushing attack, like trip attack, works on melee and ranged attacks equally. So I really like the strategy of an archer taking pushing attack and trip attack and pushing somebody back and then knocking them prone on their first and second attacks is a really cool combo, because now that target is pushed back 15 feet. When they get up, they have to spend half their movement, and then they move forward again, and they're back to where they started. It's a really good way to kind of push back that front line of battle. Or again, like, who's seeing that ranged attack coming out of nowhere and knocking you off a bridge or into a wall of fire or into a cloud kill? I really like this one with ranged attacks.
Now we come to Rally. Rally is a maneuver that lets you bolster one of your teammates. You choose an ally that can either hear or see you, and you use your superiority die, roll that, and they get to add temporary hit points equal to the die roll plus your charisma modifier.
It takes a bonus action to activate this ability on your turn, so the best way to use this maneuver is actually to never use it in combat.
How so?
Well, you can use it outside battle, use your bonus action on each of your allies, spend all your superiority dice to grant each of your allies in your party temporary hit points, because temporary hit points don't go away on a short rest. They only go away on a long rest.
And then you take a short rest
to
regain
gain all of them back. The temporary hit points won't stack, so you can't use it again after that. So you're going into battle with the temporary hit points already in place on all your party members. Because you can't use this to save somebody. It's temporary HP, so if they're at 0, you're not going to bring them back into the fight. That would be really cool if it actually healed people, but it doesn't. The problem with doing it this way is that it's strictly worse than taking the Inspiring Leader feat.
Yeah, I mean, really the only case there is if you really wanted other feats other than Inspiring Leader, and you really wanted to give your party temporary hit points.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that kind of pokes a big hole in Rally.
Yes, because even as your superiority die gets larger, ultimately Inspiring Leader will always grant more reliably more hit points than it can.
Also, when you're using Rally, you're doing each roll separately for each character, so you don't get a consistent number, whereas Inspiring Leader is consistent.
As a fighter, I actually think that your maneuvers are a harder choice than your feats. I think a lot of fighters are going to end up with 1 or 2 extra feats because they get extra feats. So you could fit in Inspiring Leader if you wanted that. Whereas I think that there's so many other maneuvers that I would take ahead of this.
Next we come to Riposte. When a creature misses you with a melee attack in combat, you can use your reaction and expend a superiority die to make an attack against them, adding the superiority die to the damage of that attack.
This is an amazing maneuver. Flat out, as a fighter, you have heavy armor. If you're going to be in the front lines, a lot of attacks are going to miss you. And this is a great way to make sure that your reaction happens every single turn.
In general, what's the best thing that you can do as a fighter? Attack a lot.
Yeah.
Get a lot of attacks in. This is a surefire way to kind of just stick it to the guy who just tried to kill you, missed, and now you get to say, nah, now you're going to die.
Yeah.
And stab them.
This maneuver, if this maneuver was the only maneuver you got, it would be amazing. Because you're going to have that high AC, you're going to wear that plate armor, hopefully have a magic item, even better if you've got a shield. Those attacks are going to miss you, and you're just going to hammer them right back. Next up is Sweeping Attack. When you hit a creature with a melee weapon attack, you can spend a superiority die to attempt to damage a creature adjacent to it. You have to choose a creature that is both adjacent to the original target and within your own reach. And if the attack would still hit the original target, you can then apply the roll of the superiority die as damage to the target beside your original target. This is a lot of rules and a lot of text and specific stipulations for a pretty mediocre amount of extra damage.
It sucks because when I read this originally, the concept that appears in my head is way cooler than what actually happens. The idea of slashing through multiple foes with one attack is something that every fighter wants to be able to do. But the amount of times that you're being swarmed and the amount of damage that you're outputting using this doesn't really amount to what you visualize in your head of slaying like 30 goblins with one swing. Yeah. Really, you're maybe killing 1.5.
Well, your superiority die is a D8. So your chances of even killing a 5 hit point kobold are low.
And that's why it's disappointing. Is you when I read it, I imagine a scenario. When I execute it, it doesn't perform the scenario that I imagine at all.
I would sooner stack up the damage on one target to bring that one target closer to death than spread the damage around anyways. And once you get extra attack, it's kind of moot. Yeah. So, I don't know. I would not take this one.
This really goes against damage priority in general.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And finally, we have trip attack. When you hit an enemy with a weapon attack, you can expend a superiority die to add that to the damage roll and force the creature to make a strength saving throw. On a fail, they are knocked prone, and now at your mercy as you hammer them with subsequent attacks because you're a fighter with action surge and multiple attacks, and you have advantage on every single one of those attacks against the now prone enemy.
We talked about different maneuvers that gave you advantage or gave allies advantage or anything like that, but really none of them are as reliably good as trip attack at giving everybody advantage unless you're doing ranged attacks. But all of your melee fighters can now run up and just start pummeling that enemy. If you use this as the first attack and you're a fighter who gets multiple attacks and you can action surge and even push out more attacks, landing that trip attack with the first hit, causing the enemy to fall over, and getting advantage on all the rest of your attacks, this is a really good maneuver. This is just outstanding.
Now, the thing to remember is that this only works on creatures that are large and smaller, and there are tons of creatures in Dungeons & Dragons that have really high strength scores. Although, they all tend to be really big ones that are larger than large anyways.
And really, I don't see a fighter running in expecting to trip a giant anyway.
That would be awesome if you could knock over that ancient dragon with this maneuver, but I don't know how you're going to do that as a little fighter.
But you can trip a manticore.
Yeah, you can. And that's actually a really valuable thing worth noting, is that this works with ranged attacks, as all of these other ones do, and when you knock a flying opponent prone, they fall out of the sky. So this is a key thing, I think, in a melee combatant's arsenal to know that, a flying enemy is just one good javelin hit from being knocked out of the sky when you have a fighter with this maneuver around. Would you agree that trip attack is the must-have?
I think, for me, trip attack and riposte are two that I would almost always take.
I wouldn't take riposte if I was playing an archer.
That's fair.
Yeah.
For some reason, most of the time when I think of fighters, I think of a melee combatant, but archer fighters are actually incredible. I do like that this list of maneuvers is actually wide open in weapon attacks. There's only a couple, like riposte, that are specific to melee, meaning that you can actually do a lot of really cool stuff as a fighter, archer, Battlemaster. I think that trip attack's a go-to.
Yeah, and I think to follow through with other must-haves, I think that if you're going to go with Sharpshooter or Great Weapon Master, you're probably going to want to take Precision Attack.
Precision Attack is super helpful. So what are your top 5? I think we actually landed on different top 5s.
Yeah.
But let's, what are your top 5 maneuvers?
So if I'm playing a melee fighter, out the gate, I'm probably going to take Precision Attack, Riposte, and Trip Attack. And then from there, I would be really tempted to take Maneuvering Attack and Menacing Attack.
I mostly agree with you. With those first 3, Precision, Riposte, and Trip, I think those are must-haves. I personally really like Disarming Strike and Pushing Attack. I think that the tactical uses of being able to knock things out of somebody's hand, or to be able to reposition them on the battlefield, or knock them off of ledges or anything like that, cannot be understated how valuable that is. So I do think it's interesting that we ended up with different top 5s, but I think really all of those that we mentioned have value. And if you're trying to put together your Battlemaster fighter, those are really the ones to look at.
Yeah, I think it does depend on a few campaign-specific things, and of course, which character you're going to build. As we said, the archer has very little reason to take riposte, and I think gains a lot from pushing attack. I think it's really hard to get past those first three, though. Like, precision and trip and riposte are just the core, I think, and define the fighter gameplay style with the Battlemaster. And then from there, you're kind of branching out into pushing, maneuvering, menacing, and disarming attack. The other ones, you can take or leave, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, really the other ones, I think, if they're going to speak to the role-playing that you imagine for your character, then they might be good. There's some that I almost wouldn't take ever.
Yeah.
But there are a few that I could see being really helpful if I was playing a certain type of character. But I think those core three that we talked about, those are definitely a top three. And then there's a few other ones that could form a top 5. At the end of the day, we talk about how by the time you reach max levels, if you are playing a campaign that goes that far, you end up with 9 out of the 16 maneuvers. And what's interesting is even between our 2 top 5 lists, we end up with 7 really good ones.
Yeah.
So you still can take all of the ones we just mentioned and a couple other ones to fill it out.
As always, though, I like to focus on what I'm going to have by 7th level, and I think that the reason why the top 5 is so valuable to think about is because that's what you're going to have at level 7. And level 7 is when you want your character to feel complete. Everything that comes after level 7 is a bonus, because so many campaigns don't last further than that.
And that's the thing, is most of us won't get to play a Battlemaster fighter that has 9 maneuvers. We're going to be sticking with 5 for majority of our gameplay.
Yeah.
So it's key to know which ones are good. So this has been a look at Battlemaster maneuvers in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you have some favorite Battlemaster maneuvers that you love, tell us about them in the comments below.
If you're enjoying the show, please consider supporting our channel on Patreon. You can follow the links in the description below to find out how you can support the channel.
And if you want to see a Battlemaster fighter using some really cool maneuvers, check out our live play Dungeons of Drakkenheim, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And of course, feats are a huge part of the fighter gameplay style, so check out our videos on those right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
in the dungeon.